10 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, now done.
Okay. So good morning and good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It is a global forum, and today we have very important topic. You can say the how to minimize the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to leave their country of origin. And I think every country almost face same issues because adverse drivers and structural factors today lots of factors are responsible. And if we see last 20-30 years, we have been experiencing climate issue and so many environment conflict is rising, all those things leading to international migration. And we have actually two very important uh, people, scholars who are working on this issue. One is Dr. Paul Maxabai, uh, who is from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is having one of the largest diaspora among African countries. I think around 4 to 7 million people. It's a very huge number compared to many African countries, and he is representing one of the leading organizations. Apart from that, Dr. Paul also is an educationist who has about 40 years of experience in teaching from the secondary level to university level. And he has been president, chief executive officer of the Global Zimbabwe Diaspora Nation Building Initiative. It is a very important forum, in fact, because most diaspora today we can identify either nation building or nation, whatever conflicting and other area. So he, being from Zimbabwe, from teaching background, he is actually representing another organization also from UK. He is chairperson of the Zimbabwe Diaspora Network, which is based in UK. Apart from that, he has been a very big team player. In fact, bringing diaspora together is not a very easy task. And Dr. Paul has been a rallying force for bringing so many Zimbabwean diaspora groups together and bringing a pan-national organization. And he has been facilitating and helping so many, national development projects, mobilizing both local level and global level. So we are very fortunate to have him today. And we have another person who is another very important scholar who is from Gambia, Mr. Lamin Darboy. He himself is a migration governance expert, migration and development expert, did his education from both Gambia and from UK, University of Sussex. He has been working extensively on migration and development and doing lots of public service also in the Gambia and involved in lots of non-governmental organization in Gambia. He is also director of Gambia National Youth Council. So we are very fortunate because migrants are actually youth. And today, Mr. Lamin will be talking about those aspects. And besides all his, social grassroots level, initiative, he is also involved in many international projects in collaboration with IOM, UNICEF, ITC, and so many other. So we are very fortunate to have two very important scholars here who have both grassroots level experience, both scholarly work, and they have played role in international level. So today, as I mentioned, this topic is very important, and we know there are structural, issues that drive, migrant to leave the country, socio-economic, political, as you know, the social level also there are issues so many social conflict, economic reasons are there. Some countries are facing political, conflict also. There are livelihood issues. There are population issues, demographic issues. There are conflict, human rights issue. There are environmental issues, so many, and I think the number of issues, if you combine together, it is a very complex actually. And Africa, in fact, like many other countries also, is a very complex in the sense Gambia will not have same dynamics like Zimbabwe. So both have different and unique. And I must have to say one more thing, that migration is such a, sometimes what actually adverse, driver for one community may not be adverse driver for another community of migrants. For example, in India, we have two very important cases like the Kerala and Punjab. Both states have high number of international migrants. At the same time, these two states also attract lots of internal migrants. So what actually adverse for those community may not be adverse for other community who are coming into that state. So there are aspirational and other things also. So we have so many complex issues today to address this, particularly GCM Objective 2. And this is very important objective because if we want to have a sustainable goal, these are the very important issue we have to address. And welcome both speaker. I'll go with Mr. Lamin first. And in fact, as I mentioned, Gambia, I think around 1 lakh diaspora, if I am not wrong. I got from different sources. I think UN DESA has described around 1,20,000 Gambian diaspora living outside, and there are other sources also. So 1 lakh to 1,50,000 around. It's a small country, and this is a very substantial number. So with your association with youth population, especially, Mr. Lamin, can you just tell what are the adverse, drivers which actually impacted the youth to migrate? Because most migrants are anyway youth. But what are the unique case in your country, the Gambia, that affect the youth, because they are also very much active workforce, and if our country loses them, it is a big loss. We call it various level. They can be brain drain, they can be simply loss of workforce. So what is the unique experience your country has? Please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Sada, and Fadi, and the entire organizers of this important webinar. As you rightly mentioned, this conversation is timely and very critical in having sustainable strategies in terms of migration management. And that means understanding the drivers and the structural factors that kind of coerce in one way or the other, or compel people to leave their places to move to the next areas. Regarding the Gambian context, I would say, first, let me just say that migration in this sense will not just be for regular migration. It's both regular and irregular migration. And when we go into this conversation, we realize that if you look at both regular and irregular migration, there is not only one factor that you could say is serving as driver that is taking young people out of the country, because of the fact that migrants are not a homogeneous category. Migrants are actually moving based on different reasons, different motivations. That is why they are leaving their place to go to the next place. But I would say economic conditions of the country. The economic conditions and poverty rates are one of the main factors that is making our young people to migrate out of poverty.
Yes.
And this is basically, their aspirations to fulfill their needs for employment, aspirations for education, quality education for that matter. And also their aspirations. For some of them, they are migrating because for ladies, for example, their husbands are on the other side of the Mediterranean or in another country. They migrate to meet them for family unification. And this is both for male and female. But let's say that Gambia has a huge youthful population. Over 68.2% of our population are within the ages of 15 to 35 years. And out of this number, about 41.5%, according to the labor force survey, are unemployed. So this is a huge, so unemployment is another, we could say is another factor that is driving these young people out of the country because they want to find opportunities, gainful opportunities outside their country where it's not possible. But again, I would say in the recent past, Gambia had also gone through some political hostilities under the leadership of the former president, Yahya Jammeh. We have seen several young people also moving out of the country due to different political issues or reasons that they have with government also. But also, I must add that this has to do also with their hope. They are confident in the economy, in both the economic and the political system, making them to either stay or to move and look for opportunities elsewhere. Recently, in 2020, one scholar, Cornel Suso, in one of her articles, the involuntary immobility cited another, issue, which is she argued that migration in the Gambia is so culturally ingrained that it can be considered as a rite of passage in some cultures. In some cultures, when young people reach a certain age, they are expected to take care of their families. There are some social expectations on them. And they usually move out either from their families or from their communities to go to the next community for seasonal farming, for other things, or even move out of the country. So as a result, it becomes something that is considered at that age, when they reach that age, whether they are being told or not, this psychological pressure is placed on the young people in terms of provision for their families as breadwinners also. But the other side of the cultural factor is remittance. There are some families that are highly dependent on remittances that have been sent back home. This is both cultural aspect of dependency on the migrant, but also it has economic aspect as well. So these are, I would say, fundamentally some of the drivers, and the economic factors have something to do with the climate change. There's erratic rainfall. You also have productivity of the land has been reduced significantly. People moving from the rural areas to urban areas are no more finding the work that they used to have in the urban areas. And the next thing they are thinking of is moving beyond the borders to go to other areas.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, in fact, to identify so many factors, starting from economic to climate to conflict, political conflict. But just I want to know, what are the occupational profile in the destination country of this youth especially, and what are the largest concentration, which country has the largest concentration of Gambian diaspora?
So I would say Gambians actually moved from Gambia to, let's say, neighboring countries like Senegal. Traditionally, I would say around the 60s, 80s towards the 1990s, through their migrants, through their social network, migrate to other African countries, mineral-rich African countries like Sierra Leone, Liberia, Angola, and Congo. But we have seen that in the recent past that has actually shifted when there is mass movement towards Europe. Okay. These migrants were actually moving across initially through the West Mediterranean, through the Canary Island, and later they started moving through the Central Mediterranean route towards Italy and elsewhere. So I must say destinations largely now are heading towards Europe, and Italy, Germany, Spain, and UK are one of the, among the largest destinations for Gambian migrants. Of course, we also have some numbers that are in the US, but because of the proximity between the Gambia and Europe, it's much easier for them to reach the source of Europe than going to other countries like in the United States of America.
Yes. So no, I was just thinking about what are the occupation who are going to Europe and what are the people who are going to, you say, Congo and other places. In fact, I think the low skilled people, especially, they may be going within the Africa, and the high skilled they may be going to Europe. Within the high skilled, what are the skill actually that is in demand in Europe for your country?
So I would say, yes, the migration out of the Gambia, those that are going to African countries are mixed. You
Okay.
have those that are actually, let's say, low street or low skill or high skill. But even those going to Europe are also mixed, I must say,
Okay.
because when people were moving, like I said, in terms of regular migration, you have a lot of high skill that are going through regular means, but some of them overstay their visas and become irregular migrants, but you have others who are low skill, who actually are not able to access the labor migration route and visas, and they use the irregular means we call back way in the Gambia. But we have seen in the recent past, the data and statistics are showing that it is not only low skill, it's even high skill also using the regular means to migrate to Europe. We have seen some teachers, we have seen some other skilled men abandoning their skill works and actually migrating through those lines. So it's mixed. The migrants from the Gambia to both international, but also within the sub-region are definitely a mixed group.
Another thing I feel, because last 2 years we have been experiencing a problem, pandemic issue. Also before that, so many adverse drivers we have mentioned. So what is the role of civil society organization, both in home countries and in destination countries? Because Gambian diaspora may be in some country very small number. I don't know, because in India, Indian diaspora case, we have very large number in almost every country. So there are several associations which they support, and also there are transnational network also. So I just want to know what are the during pandemic, even before or now, whatever during these adverse conditions, what is the role of civil society organization? Because you are very closely associated with this.
So yes, like you said, there are, even during the pandemic or even when borders were closed, people were still migrating. I mean, that is only pointing to the fact that, restrictions on border closures are not effective strategies to managing migration or even stopping irregular migration. There should be a proactive steps partnership to address the root causes, to ensure that, and also limit the barriers to people's movement. And there is a need for that collaborative and proactive actions, to help these young people also fulfill their aspirations in life. So CSOs in the Gambia are involved in advocacy, especially in behavior change and using behavior change and communication strategies to provide comprehensive information to these would-be migrants or other young people, potential migrants, on what are the risks, because some young people migrate without knowing what are the risks that they are even going to face. So they are provided information on it so that they can make informed decisions and choices. Again, they are also being provided information regarding opportunities that are available in the country. Some people actually migrate without knowing what opportunity exists in the country. Some also don't know what opportunity exists within the ECOWAS sub-region, because within the ECOWAS sub-region, there is no visa, there is free movement. People can go from one country to the other, and they also have opportunity to work there. So those opportunities are also shared with them, and of course, other countries. But they are also being told how to move from Gambia to other countries safely and using the regular means. CSOs are also, like National Council and IOM, have migration information centers across the country. These migration information centers serve as one-stop centers where young people can go and get information, guidance, and also counseling, especially for returnees, because we have a good number of migrants who were returned from transit countries, and some were even deported from Europe and elsewhere. CSOs are also conducting skills training. They are also conducting entrepreneurship training for young people to address the root causes. They are providing education, reintegration of returnees, and even providing access to finance for young people to have their own startups and be able to start their own enterprises that could create jobs. So there is an engagement that CSOs are doing, especially youth CSOs, with development partners and government to address some root causes of migration.
You also talked about collaborative action. In fact, that is what very important during crisis, anywhere. In fact, during COVID crisis, Indian governments, even diaspora organization helped some Sri Lankan diaspora, Bangladeshi diaspora. It happens that, what is the collaborative initiative your diaspora organization made with, say, for example, co-African diaspora or other diaspora, or with government agency, UN agency? What are some of the best collaborative initiative your CSOs have done?
So in Gambian diaspora are quite active in the way the country, I mean, not only in the governance, but also in the economic development. For example, economically, remittance account for more than 15% of our GDP. So Gambia is even, in fact, let me say, one of the, remittance dependent countries in Africa, so to speak. But this is, apart from this, many families are dependent on remittances from their families that are in the diaspora, and they are migrants. Some are also transnationals. So diaspora associations and hometown associations that have been established have become catalysts for development in their communities, in their hometowns, and in their neighborhood. And we have also seen diasporas engaging government directly to have a diaspora directorate and even a diaspora strategy that established by the Gambia through the Gambian diaspora engagement. And there is also annual what they call the Stake of the Nation, where the Gambian diaspora actually come home and engage with the government to do some advocacy, raise awareness on the contribution of diaspora towards the socio-economic development of the country, but also to kind of claim their space in the governance, in the socio-political and governance spaces in the country. Yes. So there are networks across the country. The world have also been a safe space for many Gambian migrants using the social networks to reach their destination, and they are provided with different support services.
Yes. In fact, we emphasize so many times about the remittances. In fact, remittances are one of the major contribution of diaspora, because, in fact, poor countries, underdeveloping countries, they largely depend upon remittances. If you have little more, skilled migration, they may do investment, but the low-skilled diasporas, migrants, they usually send remittance, and that is also very important for rural development and so many transformative impact it has. So I just want to know what are the it has also potential to address some of the adverse drivers. What is the role of some of the banking sector? You can say the economic kind of bank or whatever, whoever plays economic role in utilizing, facilitating all these remittances, because this is actually very important for a poor family.
So yes, in the Gambia, the Central Bank of the Gambia is engaged with the diaspora, especially in the Stake of the Nation, to account for the annual remittances that have been received, and how that also contribute to the GDP. And this is actually not just an advocacy tool, but also to show the importance of remittance, and how there's physical policies need to also look at migrants and their contribution to the economy. And I would also add that the private sector, there are a lot of Gambian diaspora who actually came back to Gambia, and they established enterprises, and these are kind of contribution like social remittances. They come with their ideas, with their knowledge, and into microfinance, and they are also working in different private sector entities, and they are providing not only jobs to address the drivers of migration, but they are directly impacting their knowledge and skills onto the young ones that they also employ within their entities. the banking, the migration projects, the microfinance that they have, they work with, not directly with banks, but they work with microfinance institutions like National Association of Cooperative Credit Union that administer these funds, and because they have the comparative advantage and skills in fund management in those microfinance projects, and they deal directly with returnees and migrants and general young people of the country to receive resources in terms of small mini grant, mini loan, and even some support that they could use for their enterprises, be it startups or small or medium enterprises. But at the moment, I think the gap that exists will be the financial sector, overall financial sector, that is the private banks. Their involvement in remittance management is not structured. And I think if that is well structured through the central bank, Gambia could actually establish, could gain a lot from the remittances that are coming into the country, which currently we could say is highly underestimated.
Yes, so very well analyzed issues. I just want to know if this is the objective, GCM objective 2, which to address the adverse drivers. Can you identify some 5, at least 4 to 5 major in the context of major adverse drivers in the context of Gambia, which we can address and bring sustainable changes?
So first, I think one of the targets that we are looking at, Gambia need to look at is one, data. Data is very important, data management. The GCM goals try to ensure that there is evidence base, that migration is decisions and policies are based on evidence, are based on data. Gambia need to actually improve on that area to ensure that accurate data in terms of movement of people, internal and outside, are managed, and also their interaction, the exchange between Gambian migrants and their families back home in form of remittances, but also other forms of remittances that are not financial remittances are also accounted for. This will provide an opportunity to provide evidence in terms of the development impact of and the contribution of migrants to the economy. Apart from that, I think the other thing is Gambians are still migrating.
Yes.
Gambians are still, and this migration, Gambians need to strategically reach out to destination countries under the GCM objectives on partnership and collaboration to ensure that the vulnerability of these migrants are reduced, if not eliminated. Because if people are migrating, they are Gambian citizens, whether they're in the transit countries, whether they're in the destination countries, there is need for there to be a strategic engagement to find ways to reduce their vulnerabilities. As I speak, Gambia refused deportation of some Gambians from Europe, and currently there are visa sanctions on Gambia government. I think that the government need to take one more step in terms of engagement. There should be strategic engagement under the GCM pillars, because GCM provides us opportunity to dialogue, to look at all the objectives, but also to see migration not as a problem, but as a situation we could collectively work to manage. Because ultimately people will move from one place to the next place. So the other side of it also will be even for internal migration, because we are having people moving from rural areas coming to the urban areas. When they do not have opportunities, they move and go to for international migration. Government need to make strategic measures, deliberate measures to provide opportunities and services for young people in the rural communities. This is essential. And I think the other thing Gambia government need to look at with stakeholders is to also institute not only policy, because there's migration policy, but I think there should be a drive and political will to drive this agenda at the level of government and provide oversight over different services that have been delivered different actors in the country. This coordination will help to ensure that we all gain the benefits of migration for the ordinary people, but also for the economy of the country.
Yes.
And I think these are some of the things that I would definitely recommend.
So thank you, Mr. Lamin. I'll get back to you after Dr. Paul speaks, and we can have a round of interactive question answer session also, and your view. I'll get back to you again. But now I'll go to Dr. Paul, who has been, as I mentioned, he has multifaceted role, being a teacher, also being a leader who unites so many diaspora groups, and both UK and in Zimbabwe. He has been heading so many organizations. He's truly giving a very exemplary role for diaspora group. So in fact, Zimbabwe diaspora is one of the largest, if I am not wrong, around 4 to 7 million, which is very big number. So now over to you, Dr. Paul. Can you just identify some of the adverse driver in Zimbabwe? In fact, Zimbabwe diaspora, they have migrated to South Africa, Zambia, to China, to USA, UK, so many colonies also, earlier colonies. So what do you see the adverse driver that pushed migrants from Zimbabwe to other country? If there are some uniqueness, like those are going to China, those are going to UK, USA, you can also bring those examples because you have a very vast experience in working different countries. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Yes, I think there have been a number of drivers that have been driving, Zimbabweans to go outside their borders. And some of them are laudable, they are positive. I might just briefly touch on this before I look at the adverse drivers. I think it might be pertinent to observe, like, the then, Secretary General Kofi Annan said when he was addressing the United Nations in 2006, he said, throughout human history, migration has been a courageous expression of the individual's will to overcome adversity and to live a better life. So what generally underpins migration is the desire for self-improvement. And that desire is set against the context, the local context, where the maximum kind of expectation or aspirations are not being met. And as a result, people look at other options. So you will find that the Zimbabwe is actually boasted it's in terms of its human capital development. After independence, there was quite a concerted effort to develop Zimbabwe's human capital. Previously, there was a bottlenecking system where people were really had many doors closed. There weren't so many opportunities, especially for the Black nationals. But that changed with independence, and as a result, there was an opening up. Many universities started coming up, many university programs, and as a result, Zimbabwe's literacy rate at one time, I think, was one of the highest, with about 96%. It was one of the highest, and even to date, the number of qualifications, or maybe qualified people with university education, there are many in Zimbabwe, and as a result, because again, Zimbabwe's main official language is English, alongside Ndebele and Shona, but mainly for business, it's English. And as a result, people are given the capacity to be able to operate in other environments. And as a result, you'll find that if you go to the African Union, in Ethiopia, there is a very high concentration of Zimbabweans who are in Ethiopia, who are working for different multinational organizations. You also go, whether it might be the World Bank, you go to different countries where high-level skills are required. You find Zimbabweans there. So that's the positive side. And also in terms of more recently, you find countries like Rwanda, which have become quite attractive as destination centers, extending an olive branch to say we want Zimbabwean teachers because of their work ethic. And also, you know, when given an opportunity to work, they work as best. However, we also find that there is one other negative driver which comes in, is the fact that, you know, the salaries in Zimbabwe are very low. So you find that people are qualified, medical doctors, teachers, when they go elsewhere, they get more than 10 times what they would otherwise get in Zimbabwe. So at the first opportunity, people are tempted to go out because they found that they are not really making ends meet. And one might also say, in terms of maybe if we look at structural factors, which could be considered to be adverse factors, you would find that, you know, there are issues around governance. There has been quite contestation around issues of governance with what you might call disputed elections, and that has been taken to court. But the toxicity in the relationships hasn't ebbed down. And I think most recently, one of the leading opposition figures had his car burnt. Obviously, we don't know who burnt it, but there are obviously people who are not too excited by seeing alternative voices. So that has been one of the challenges, I think, which you know, independent African countries born out of the liberation have. That transition, you know, like Zambia did, you know, moving from the Liberation Party to other parties, that is hotly contested. And some might say by right, really, the Liberation Parties, so defined, are entitled to rule in perpetuity. Whereas others say maybe the reason why people really went out to war was that they could have one man, one vote, all right, adult suffrage, and the ability really to have democratic disputation allowed. The fact that you have alternative voices doesn't make you a Western puppet, but it makes you an independent actor. And I think as a country, we would benefit more through that democratic disputation. And in terms of the real practicalities, it would appear that the space for democratic disputation is gradually shrinking. Why do I say so? You know, I think a striking example can be learned from what happened here in the United Kingdom. There was an unfortunate incident where one of the parliamentarians was murdered by somebody maybe with extreme views. And when they were in parliament yesterday, they reached out to each other across the party divide. And it was quite sobering, quite encouraging to see how people can still have their differences, but get together when it comes to issues of nationhood. So I believe that remains one of the challenges that Zimbabwe and other African countries have. One of saying, how can we engage each other and find common ground as compatriots? Because I think the sense of nation is bigger than party. The sense of nation is bigger than leader. So there are attempts, you know, to find common ground. In that common ground, you know, like us as a Zimbabwean, as a diaspora organization, we are extremely convinced that the challenges that face Zimbabwe, our country of birth, are not beyond the capacity of Zimbabweans working together to find. So there is common ground which can be found. And that common ground requires that people reach out to each other across the aisle. And when that is not done, you then breed toxicity. You breed contested elections. So I'm quite, you know, I was quite pleasantly encouraged by the example in Kenya where Uhuru Kenyatta, the president, reached out to Odinga, and they had a breakfast tea, and they said, brother, let's bury the hatchet. And it's possible that nations can find each other and move together. And maybe the challenge then comes to say, how do you engage the principal players to speak to the better angel in them? Because in every one of us, there is the angel, and there is also the unbecoming part of us all. So there is a sense in which even us as a diaspora, we have sought to say, how do we engage the principal players across the political divide without being partisan ourselves, but to say, just in the stroke of your pen, things can change. And when you reach out to your brother, when you reach out to your sister, and it's a win-win situation. So that's one position that we think, it's a win-win situation which can be realized. So there is need for that acknowledgement of democratic disputation in the search for true nationhood. And there is a sense in which somebody once said, people generally don't do what you expect. They do what you inspect. So there are needed checks and balances. Even the best of us, or when we are left to ourselves, when we are given unfettered powers, we make not the brightest of decisions. So there is a sense in which there are needed checks and balances within the executive, within the judiciary, the institutions. We need to develop strong institutions. So also, political parties as well, they need also to develop the capacity to engage each other sanely without name calling, but looking at the broad key issues to say, how do we build our nation? Because Zimbabwe can really be the jewel that it once was, at the beginning of independence. And that privilege, I think, is one way we are saying, how can people work together across, let's say, civil society, the churches, the government, the opposition parties, and even the diaspora. The diaspora comes in not as an interested political party, but as citizens, concerned citizens who want really to contribute to national development. So those are some of the challenges I think that we find. The need for an appreciation of the plurality of the voices that are there for the progress of the nation.
Yes. So in fact, two things, is it over or shall I? Okay. Two things which you emphasized. One is strong institution, and the other one is very, leadership who can bring together differences, different communities. And that is what challenge for everywhere, I think, not just Zimbabwe, everywhere. In fact, 20 years back, 15 years back, I recall my own, observation about Zimbabwe cricket team. Zimbabwe was very famous in cricket. And the cricket team was composed of various ethnic groups, very multicultural. So I was surprised being, from Zimbabwe, there is in the team, there is one or two Indian, there are one or two white people, there are few black people, mixed people. So such a diverse, multicultural team, and it was one of the very strong cricket team. So what you emphasize, multiculturalism is very big strength actually. In fact, you yourself is forging bond with many diaspora group. You can, you can think, you can realize that how important it is to have differences and how to forge it, the bond. It is all very important. Now my question is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of diaspora organization? In fact, you have several diaspora organizations. Somewhere you can find diaspora organization playing exemplary role. Somewhere they are also playing very divisive role. So what are the major, if you bring out some kinds of Pakan, what are the major weakness and strength of Zimbabwean diaspora organizations?
Thank you very much. One of the, I think the major weakness would be, the element of competition. Let's say if an organization starts today, 2 weeks or a month from now, you'll find that there's now a parallel structure coming up. That competition element is one weakness that I would say is there. And also the other weakness might be in terms of inclusivity. So you might have some diaspora organizations which are more regional based, maybe from Matebeleland or from Mashonaland or from, so but at the same time, we need to acknowledge that there are some groups which are, though regional based, are doing very well. Those, I think what is also important is that diaspora organizations are finding a niche for themselves and moving into that space and doing the best that they can. There are quite a number, I might not mention all of them. There is one organization which is made up of women, mainly from Matebeleland, is called Koki. It's a Ndebele word, is in Lovukazi, like the female lady elephants. And what they've actually gone a long way in, coalescing their collectivity as people from that region, and they've embarked on projects. Some of them is like building, setting up boreholes in each one would be given an opportunity to identify 2 places where they can sink a borehole. One maybe in their home area, and then another one somewhere else. And they are also actually going into quite a number of other projects, buying houses. I understand in Central in South Africa, they are buying million rand houses. So it's very possible that people can work together. That also becomes the strength, where we are now realizing the power of coalescing as a diaspora. Across different interests. I think one other concept which has really been appreciated very much in terms of the structuring is around clusters. So you might find that there are some people who are interested in investment, for instance. And maybe I might also just point out that most recently, the Zimbabwe Diaspora Nation Building Initiative, of which I have the privilege of chairing, has been having some engagement with the government of Zimbabwe through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Actually, in the last meeting, the deputy minister was the head of delegation, said it would be good that we have quarterly meetings where we have periodic reviews, exchange, compare notes. And also what we've been trying to do is the Zimbabwe diaspora policy, which was adopted in 2016, is being updated. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs graciously asked us as a diaspora organization to facilitate the collection of data from diasporas. So we are seeing that when we get it together, we are able to amplify the diaspora voice. We are also able to scale up whatever projects might have been done by smaller groups. Yes. So we can do them on a bigger scale. I remember yesterday, one of our chapters in Australia, one of the leaders there, he had found a report about that lady group, and he said, please, could you give us more information about how they do this so that we can also have a comparable template, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And I got in touch with the chairperson, who was very excited. So what we're going to try to do is to organize a Zoom session where they can walk us through the journey they have walked to date, and then that can help. So I could say the advantages we are finding is that when we work together, we tend to do things better. And also our basic philosophy, like my basic philosophy is that we are at our best when we play to the strengths of our members. So we need to be able to be conscious and see who can contribute in what respect. Like maybe like a world-class team, you want to have all your best players and positioned in the best places that they can operate. And then together that way, we can really achieve.
Yes, Dr. Paul, another area actually we couldn't focus much, that is the natural disaster. In fact, your country faced Cyclone Idai in 2019, which displaced more than, I think, 3 lakh people. In fact, it was a major disaster. So one of the adverse drivers is natural disaster, which is actually frequently happening in the last 20 years. If we see, the numbers are increasing, and Zimbabwe also experienced several times. So what is your take on addressing this particular natural disaster and mitigating the adverse driver for migration?
Thank you very much. Some of us, like our deputy president and myself, have had an opportunity of being part of IOM and UN initiated conversations around disaster management, looking at the Haiti models. And we have come to appreciate that it's very important to plan before even the onset of the disaster, so that you have structures which are ready to respond as best. And one thing I could also add in terms of the way the diaspora has responded in terms of disaster, like here in the UK, there was a crisis coalition which went beyond the main diaspora groups, but brought them together. And like our UK Zimbabwe Diaspora Network UK, we actually have got a charitable arm called Zim Action Foundation. So that is mainly there for charitable responses, but also looking at how to coordinate with other groups when disaster strikes. So we are also learning how best really to respond, really not only as a diaspora, but working together with other stakeholders so that these systems are in place even before the disaster occurs.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Paul. We'll get back to you both again, and we'll have a last round and one interactive round. So before that, I request Professor Vinod Kadria is here, and Paddy is also here. If you can briefly give some of your reflection on this discussion, it will be very good. Professor Vinod Kadria.
Thank you, Sadanand. Well, friends, this was a great opportunity to listen to our colleagues from the continent of Africa, which is a very important region in terms of not only origin, but as you gather from these discussions today, from these 2 speakers, are also regions of destination. So from that point of view, I think we have got 2 case studies of Zimbabwe and Gambia, and we have learned what are the adverse drivers, and what are the structural factors. Now, when we look at the entire picture, then there is a tendency that we need to differentiate between them. The moment we talk about, we heard them speaking about these, one in the case of the, the politically demoralizing culture that drives people out, is more of a structural issue. Whereas natural disasters that Sadanand mentioned are actually adverse drivers. So we need to think in terms of what is a long-term underlying factors, the structural characteristics that makes people to change their location. And what is it that works as a trigger, as the last point, as the last straw on the camel's back that actually makes them take that decision. So that has to be, considered as, I think, adverse drivers as different from structural factors. So this is where I tend to think that both of them, both categories, actually are in the domain of push factors, rather than the pull factors. If you go back to the traditional, kind of bifurcation between push and pull factors, then we are in the domain of push factors only. And that is where I am reminded of Arthur Conan Doyle's, Sherlock Holmes, that why the word minimization, minimize these adverse drivers and the structural factors that cause out migration. This is like crime, that you can minimize it, but you cannot bring it to zero. You cannot eliminate it. That, I think, is an interesting element of migration that we need to take into account. And that is where I think this objective number 2 makes us think in terms of what could be the strategies of the countries to adopt in minimizing these adverse drivers and structural factors. This is where I think we need to put our minds together and wear the hat of a researcher, a methodologist, because this particular course is on 23 objectives. So we need to very carefully tread the path of not stepping onto other objectives, how to differentiate this one particular objective from the other. For example, if we start thinking about data or statistics and others, then we will, probably go on to the objective number 1. Similarly, if we think about partnership, then perhaps we'll go on to objective number 23. If we think in terms of diaspora, then perhaps we'll be on objective number 19. So that's where I think the challenge lies in a group like this, how to define the contours of the discourse, how to delimit the discourse, delimit the discourse, that I think is very, very important. And if we do so, then we have very interesting examples coming from these two eminent speakers. For example, we heard from Lamine Darbo about Gambia, and a lot of people are migrating to nearby country, Senegal. This is a classic case of South-South migration. But also we need to think, are the migrants, because he also mentioned about risks, are the migrants facing risk in the destination country? So are the migrants, actually going from frying pan to fire, so to say? That I think is very important in terms of looking at the South-South migration. Or our friend Paul mentions about Zimbabwean migration to Ethiopia or Rwanda or even Kenya and so on. So whether it is actually leading to bilateral agreements or disagreements, that I think is very important. Is the agreement or the collaboration going to be transitory or long lasting? That has to be, time horizon has to be brought into the picture. Are we thinking in terms of short and medium term strategies, or are we also thinking of the long term strategy? If we put them on a scale of time, then one can perhaps work against the other. It can be self-defeating. That has to be kept in mind, whether to minimize the adverse drivers and the structural factors that drive people out, how to handle them. Are they going to backfire? That, I think, those are the critical questions that need to be raised. And I think this gives us the two presentations that we heard these two people give us a lot of material to think about. I would like to say that in terms of researchers, we first need to identify. That is step number 1. How to identify our categories. What are the adverse drivers as different from other drivers, as different from structural factors? And then we have to identify the structural factors themselves. So identification of the variables that we are going to study is the first important step that we need to undertake in isolating them from other issues, from other objectives. That I think is very, very crucial. Having done that, having identified, we need to know their dimensions. We need to know the dimensions of those variables. Are they significant? Are they insignificant? How large are they? How difficult are they to be handled? How easy they are to be handled? That would call for measurement issue of the identified variables that we have. And then comes the strategy. The strategy to minimize, in this case, the adverse drivers and the structurally negative factors that actually lead to migration. What strategies, what policies? And we heard a lot from the case of Zimbabwe. We heard a lot about building bridges, about creating institutions to engage with each other, or leadership to bring them together. These are strategies. These are policy matters that need to be brought into the picture for the purpose, for the objective of minimizing what we want to minimize. That I think is central to the question that needs to be understood. And that's where we need to raise more questions than answers. Because, you know, the objectives that have been given there are not to be, found solution or overnight. We need to work together. Because migration, somebody mentioned about Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan had to struggle 16 years, long 16 years, to bring the agenda, for the agenda to come on the agenda, on the multilateral agenda. 2018, the GCM. It all started in 2002 when Kofi Annan actually brought it on the surface and piggybacked on the agenda of development. When we talk about migration and development, we think that they are, cause and effect relationship. No, it was a very strategic decision to bring migration on the global agenda on the back of the development agenda, because people migrate, the countries, the member states will not even touch the hot potato of migration because it is going to affect their sovereignty. It's a sovereign issue. Trade is different. Trade in goods and services and factors of production is different. They are non-life, material. But when it comes to human beings, the thinking human beings, then people will become, scared whether to open their borders or not. So that, I think, is very important issue that needs to be brought while, thinking of minimizing. And that's where whether we need to move from multilateral negotiations to bilateral negotiations. As I said, South countries are the multilateral negotiation. Let's face it, it's not a level playing field. And that's where I think we need to address it through bilateral negotiations. Senegal and Gambia, Zimbabwe and Rwanda, these are bilateral negotiations. Or India and Gambia, for example, India and Ghana, for example, can come together, put a strategy and say that this is our, something that is ideal for us, and we will make a beginning there. I will go one step further. I think countries in Africa or in Asia or in Latin America can take a stronger position of saying, we will not even have bilateral negotiations, we will go unilateral. We'll take a decision that we think is right, and then we will hope that other countries will join us. That needs sticking one's neck out. That, I think, is very, very important. So one can go on debating these issues, and that's where I think the crux of this kind of a forum, of a course, which is running for 6 months on debating the 23 objectives, need to raise more questions, need to be critical rather than taking only facts and just beating around the bush and talking about the things that we have been talking for the last 20 years. We need to think out of the box and challenge ourselves. That, I think, is the beauty of this particular forum. I'm happy to share more ideas when we hear back more questions, and particularly the interventions from the two distinguished speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vinod Kadria, and you, in fact, made it very, difficult in the sense you wanted to make us to focus on particularly on adverse drivers. But at the same time, it is very difficult because they're all interrelated also. And same time, each country has both unique adverse driver and general of general adverse driver of those kind of thing. So which you mentioned, some we have to handle with bilaterally, some with multilaterally. So this is a complex thing, and we took your point very, we'll identify those things, and very important point you raised. Thank you. And those who do not know Professor Kadria, he is the president of GRFDT, economist, one of the famous economists, and who worked on migration and economics. He worked with IOM also and many other top global organizations. So this is the brief introduction I just want to give. Now, if Paddy is there, if you have any comments, short comment, Paddy, please go ahead. After that, we'll open this house for question answer.
Dr. Sada, thank you very much. Actually, I come to the floor in respect to your call, but actually I think there seems to be a lot of hands raised. So maybe
Yes.
just to agree with what Professor Kadria has just shared here with us, and also to thank the panelists in really unpacking what seems as very complex economic, very complex social and cultural issues that all impact in one way or another combined, to drive young people, particularly out of their home countries to seek a better livelihood. I just wanted maybe to just zero into, the state responsibility. I think that the GCM Objective number 2 calls states to do, and the commitment that states that signed up onto this, but also states that have signed up, for instance, to the SDG 2030, in which we only have, we're now counting 9 years, isn't it? Even less than 9 years for us to get to 2030. And some of the targets there, whether they have to do with reducing inequalities, whether they have to do with providing, better mechanisms for migrants to be able to make a decision to migrate rather than being forced to make the decision to migrate, I think remain very important, and many other aspects, I think, of the 2030 agenda. And just maybe also to just say that, to agree with Professor Kadria's point on the fact that it's very important that we unpack some of these complexities. It's very important, I think, that we also understand that, the migrant groups that are being driven out, and even those with the potential to be driven out, particularly related to environmental degradation, or whether we're talking about natural disasters and climate change, that these, while these are sort of out of the hands of government, they still remain within the realms of government to prepare much better frameworks around, response to disaster, much better frameworks, I think, in terms of also planning and forecasting, but also that takes into account not just what happens to the land, but also what happens to the people and the movements that have to happen. And particularly looking at the region where the Gambia is, and also looking at that wider region there in the Sahel region, one would also say that, in areas like that, and also in other areas, you also see this in the eastern part of Africa. And maybe let's also talk about going the other side of the world when you see it also in the Pacific, that you have sort of patterns. I'm not a professional weather person, but I think, you see these patterns that form around different spaces and different lands. And therefore, these patterns over huge masses of land, that also means that it should compel governments, through regional mechanisms, through coming together to work around sort of common solutions, I think. And so I wanted to just say that I think states are not left alone to do this job. There are regional mechanisms that need to sort of be pushing the efforts that are being made all the way from the local level, at the national level, at the subnational level, as well as at the central government level, to make sure that mitigation measures are really taking care of potential migrants that would be driven out of their homes to seek livelihood elsewhere, and be able in most cases to even cross borders. So I think that it's highly important. And if you look at the African continent, you've got the African Free Continental Agreement that's coming up. It's very trade focused, but at the same time, it recognizes that trade moves with people. But at the same time, as we go on to looking for industrialization, I think we also need to keep in the back pocket, what we can do to take care of those that are prone to become sort of climate migrants or climate refugees, as the new terms are coming up. Thank you, Dr. Sahu.
Yes, thank you, Paddy, for bringing those issues. Now we have so many questions. We have around 20 minutes in hand. So let's go with the first question. Anthony Bassi from S. Please go ahead. Aniti, I think.
Okay, Anetia Bassi. Anetia Bassi from
I mispronounced.
Okay, Anetia Bassi from Nigeria.
Yes, please go ahead.
My question goes to Cabo. We are talking about remittance. Remittance forming 15% of the GDP of the Gambians. And it's on record that many in the diaspora, when they're into one problem or the other, the embassies there left them to their peril. What are we doing towards that? What are we doing to come in aid, in terms of aid?
Yes.
Diaspora, because it's already.
There is, yours is mute. Please unmute. Please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it is okay, but it is going off and on.
Double, can you get? Do you get my question?
Can you say that again?
I say it's on record. Find 15% remittance from the
Again, some
You
network.
have been muted again. I don't know what happened.
to go to the embassy and get it. What are we doing about that?
I'm sorry, but I
When
can't
people
get.
in diaspora has problem, when people in diaspora has problem, they find it very hard to go to the embassy and have solution. What are we doing about that? Having in mind that they form 15% of the national GDP of the homeland.
Okay.
Yes, you go ahead, Mr. Lamin.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So I think that was, as part of my presentation, I highlighted the role of diaspora in the development of the country. They have been contributing, and their contribution in terms of remittances is one negotiation, opportunity for negotiation to ensure that diasporans are franchised. Because to be honest, in the case of the Gambia, even not just their contribution and the problems they have, but our Gambian diasporas are not voting into even our own election, in the general election. So they are being defranchised. When they have problems that have to do with, let's say, documentation, they go to the embassies and they receive support. But in terms of the problems they have, some of them receive support in terms of that we are aware of, in terms of technical support or as part of their hometown associations and their engagement with the Gambian community that are linked to the Gambian mission. The problem here is often these are regular migrants. My concern goes to irregular migrants, those whose status are not even being regulated, those who are even on deportation road, those who actually are hiding from even the police and others. And despite these, fragile conditions or uncertainties, they're still contributing, remittances in one way or the other. So that is still, I would say, a huge area that the government and all stakeholders that are working within the migration landscape in the country need to work on to ensure that these needs have been addressed. And that's why in my presentation, I said there should be that political will in terms of migration, because diaspora engagement and diaspora interest and support to diaspora are all within the migration policy. But their implementation is still what I consider as a gap that need to be addressed to ensure that the Gambian diaspora are meaningfully engaged, not only to be sending resources, but they are engaged meaningfully and in a systematic way so that they also are provided with support in the member state or countries that they find themselves, and they are also protected through our embassies and high commission that are established across the world.
Yes, we have another question from Luis. Luis, please go ahead. I think Joan also was there.
Hello,
Yes.
yeah, Luis. This is Luis. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Lamin and probably Tokagri have looking about the structural cause of migration or illegal migration. It's always difficult for us to discuss about the dumping of guns, the dumping of weapons in Africa. When people talk about it, it doesn't sound viable. But when you dump guns in Africa, and when people fight with guns, they will create more refugees situations. You know, but when there are no guns, people, when they quarrel, when they have differences, and if there is a war, less people, the refugee situation will not be that harmful, will not be that high. And another one is we are also not discussing this root cause of migration, the Golden Visa project, whereby rich people in Africa are encouraged to go to some EU countries with their investment, thereby reducing the investment opportunities in Africa. And then people from Africa, when they don't have jobs, of course, they'll migrate. So I think Professor Kadria, if he has time, he can also look into this. Thank you. And Lamin.
Yes, any speaker can respond, even Professor Kadria can respond.
Okay, so I just want to say quickly that dumping of guns in Africa is still I will say, a conversation. That is still part of the conversation. But my point of view will be is about our government, because it is our governments that actually, we put in office and we are holding to account that actually use our own resources to go and buy these guns from some of the other weapon producing countries. In some instances, the clandestine way, those are criminal in their nature. But those that are actually through our nation states, where different kinds of weapons, be it light weapons or small arms or other stuff, are brought into our country, I think we need to hold our governments to account to ensure that our resources are invested, on human capital development, on our development needs, than prioritizing, militarizing and only, buying heavy weapons and arms and everything, while our people are even struggling to have the basic services in the countries. And at the end of the day, they end up migrating to go and look for services elsewhere. They call it greener pasture. The other thing on the golden visas, there are different visa regimes that are actually being established. If the visa regimes in itself, I mean the externalization of the, let's say looking at the North-South relationship, and people are paying money to even get the visas from these embassies and all other stuff, that's part of the regular migration, despite the fact that there is different concerns about its exploitative nature in terms of people paying the resources. They are not even getting the visas. There are others who actually, out of the affluence, the minority affluence, who don't even have to struggle to get these visas. And I think that's why, if you look at the migratory trajectory, you still have a lot of those who did not have those social networks or those resources, especially in the Gambia. They didn't have the visas, they didn't have the monies to go to those countries to go and pay with their investments. They end up using the risky route, which is going through the ground or going through the back way, through the Mediterranean. And they end up risking their lives in the Mediterranean or even in the desert. And for me, that is one point where the safe, orderly migration is providing opportunity for us to have this conversation between the sending countries and the receiving countries, but even between the neighboring countries, like sub-regional blocks, like Africa, to have conversations. How do we ensure that we utilize our human resource, our human capital, instead of allowing them to perish in the deserts or in the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Any comments from Professor Khadria or Dr. Paul? Otherwise, we have so many questions actually in the chat box also, and so many are waiting. So we can go ahead and maybe we'll come back before the end. Okay, then we'll go to Salmanu, and I think Joan was the first. Let's go to Joan, then we'll come to Salmanu. Joan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Joan Cherop Gloria from Kenya. I work at a trade union that deals with workers who are supposedly to be migrant workers or prospective migrant workers in a way. So I want to comment that today's topic or objective is very interesting one, because we have these pull and push factors that causes people to want to migrate to other places in search of employment. So I would want to comment that maybe one of the factors that is a factor that causes people to want to go out of their origin countries, for instance, or majorly in Africa, it could be overpopulation. Could we say that overpopulation, so that a lot of resources that people need are not able to get?
Yes. Is it addressing to both or any particular speaker? Okay, anyone can respond. Mr. Lavin and
About Paul, yeah, Dr. Paul and Mr. Lamin, anyone of them can respond. That overpopulation in our countries is one of the major factors that causes people to migrate outside their countries in search of employment. That is one observation. Secondly, to Dr. Lamin, as he has said that Gambia being a sending country, and it sends majorly to Europe and UK. This is due to its proximity to those that country. Therefore, that means that I wanted to think that maybe the migrants in Gambia who are migrating to Europe and let's say UK, they could be experiencing or they are getting a better terms of employment, unlike, for instance, ours. Like the proximity in Kenya is closer to the Gulf countries. That is why we find a lot of Kenyans moving faster or getting access to the Gulf countries faster than to the other countries which are more developed. So I wanted to ask Dr. Lamin, Mr. Lamin, if the migrants from his home country, are they experiencing better terms of employment, or they could also be experiencing worse forms of employment? Thank you very much.
yes, we have 7 minutes, so please quickly respond. We have one more at least we can take.
All right, just quickly to say it's Mr. Lamin, not doctor. And the proximity I was referencing is comparing it to the US, because US is another destination of Gambian migrants. But compare the US and Europe, Europe is more closer to Gambia than the US. I just also want to say that Gambian migrants in Europe, some of them actually did not even have jobs. Some of them are into employment. Some are still in camps awaiting deportation. Some are started their integration. Some are going to school. They are in different stages. So it is not that they all have access to employment upon arrival, and that is what is driving them to go there. I just want to say that there are networks, those who are there, because Gambia, I would say, It's a tourism destination, and different tourists come. Gambia has relationship with West Scandinavian countries or Western European countries for a long time, and they have built networks. People have built networks over time as well. Thank you.
Yes, any response?
Maybe if I could come in about the issue of overpopulation. I think like Zimbabwe, I think there could be about 12 million people. And you talk of other cities like, other big cities, 12, maybe you can just have those 12 million in just one city. So maybe overpopulation in some countries could be an issue, but generally, I think the material conditions on the ground are the ones which are the principal drivers. For instance, one conversation which has been coming up is that many Zimbabweans, who are now getting to their retirement age in their 60s, they want to go back home. And some have actually tried to go back home and settle and found the conditions not that, conducive. So they've had to leave again. So in that case, I think maybe the population issue is not the only principal driver, although some countries could have that as an issue, but otherwise the other material conditions, which are prevalent are principal drivers, whether they can be structural or others. But maybe there is also a conflation of these factors, that the structural overlap into the other, factors as well, whether they be unemployment or, low pay. They are sort of, there is a conflation in that respect.
Yes, we have one last question we'll entertain. That is Mr. Muhammad. Please be brief. After that, we'll have concluding remark. Muhammad. Okay. If Muhammad is not there, then
Hello, I'm here,
yes,
sir. I'm here.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm here. Thank you. I have a small question for Mr. Lamin, and I want to comment on the contribution of my brother from Nigeria, Ngozi. And a small question to Lamin is on the structural factors he assumed are responsible for migration from Gambia to other parts of the world. And from data I read on the migration in Gambia, I have seen that about 10% of migrants, about 10% of the population the migrants from other parts of the country in Gambia make up about 10% of the population of Gambia. And then seeing only about 7% or 4.5% of Gambians, the population of Gambia migrating to other parts of the world. And now I want you to help me reconcile this. Will economic poverty and unemployment be the reason why more people are coming into Gambian and then fewer are living to other parts of the world? Only 4% of the population are living to other parts, and then the number of people coming into Gambia from neighboring countries, Senegal and Conakry, make up 10% of the population of Gambia. So let him help me reconcile this. I don't think poverty and unemployment is the reason people are living Gambia.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Like I said, when I was talking about the drivers, I said
it will be one of them. It's not as much important contribution on the
there is some noise. Please mute.
Seems your mic is breaking. Can you say that again?
Yes, I think some noise came and now it is okay.
Okay. All right. So I was just saying, when I was talking about the drivers of migration from the Gambia, I clearly indicated that there is no one reason why people are migrating from the Gambia. And I must say, yes, there are others who are migrating because of lack of employment, and there are others who are migrating because of underemployment. But there are also others who are migrating because they want to migrate. Is their aspiration? That's their fulfillment. They feel that is what they need to. That's the good life they want to go and that they know that they want to experience. And I mentioned different reasons. For others, it's, like I said, some authors says that it's like an expectation on them to move out of the home, to go and look for resources because they are going to take responsibility. It's also part of the learning, you know, for them. But other people, migrants, Gambia is both a destination, is a source, but also a destination. You have a lot of other countries, citizens of other countries around the area that come to Gambia. One, Gambia has been relatively peaceful country in the sub-region, So that has made it not only a destination for refugees, but it has also been a place for migrants. I must also say that, you know, anywhere in the world, you know, you see people moving out, there are other people who are also coming in there. Migrants, often for most of us, I would say, there are things, certain type of jobs we don't want to do at home, but we want to go and do elsewhere. So there are also differences in terms of the income people earn from their labor. Those in the Gambia would want to earn maybe little higher than what they are already earning, while others from other countries might feel they are actually going there to earn little higher than what they were earning from their own country. Like Gambian can go to Sierra Leone, can go to Nigeria, or even go to, you know, Senegal. But this depends also on the different category of migrants that are moving from one region to the next. I must say most of my secondary school teachers were either Nigerians, Ghanaians, or Sierra Leonean. That does not mean actually that there is no teaching job in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, or Liberia, but they actually moved to Gambia due to one reason or the other. It might not necessarily be job, but because they have other conditions that attract them to Gambia, just like Gambians are attracted to go to elsewhere outside the Gambia as well. Thank you.
I think it is very well presented, your argument, Lamin, in terms of, you know, the multiplicity of the migration streams. You know, that's where we need to understand. I think you have very correctly emphasized the fact that we can have migration and counter migration into the same place. And we need not assume that all migrants are making their decisions correctly. As you said, learning, it's a learning process. So it's a trial and error, you know, it's looking for an alternative. That alternative may not turn out to be the best one. So that's, I think, is the crux of the issue, where we find that, you know, Gambia is a country of origin, also a country of destination for others. So I think we have a mixed picture there. And learning is very, very important, because decision making is a very difficult task, and you can go wrong on our decisions. And that's where I think migrants are much vulnerable and they need guidance. And that's where I think GCM should, or all of us put together, to try to, you know, help the migrants, bring them to the center stage and see how we can minimize the mistakes that they make. It was a treat listening.
We have only 1 minute. I think we are already running short of. So the concluding remark, I just want to request both the speaker identify 2 best practices, how to have the sustainable, you know, approach to address this adverse drivers, maybe related to your own country, government or NGO or anything, or from the diaspora organization itself. 2 best practices. Very briefly, go with Dr. Paul first.
2 best practices, maybe like one contributor in the chat has mentioned the issue of maybe trying to find out even from the diaspora themselves to say, what are the issues that would make you go back home? What are the circumstances that keep you away from going back home? So I think I think the issue of migration and the problems around it is not an easy one, but a lot can be done by all stakeholders, you know, working together to ameliorate the situation and reduce the degree of negative impact. And particularly also, I think there is also a need for a more humane treatment of the irregular migrants who are often tossed like, you know, clothes that have got dirt on them. So I think more humane treatment of irregular migrants would help as well.
Mr. Lamin?
So I think moving forward, government and the stakeholders in the migration ecosystem need to work together to, especially in the Gambia, to address fundamentally economic drivers, which has to do more with both employment, but also have to do with the climatic conditions that are threatening, not only threatening, that has threatened the livelihood of rural livelihood. And beyond that, the government also need to put in place measures to ensure that our marine resources are protected, because that is also serving as livelihood. If the on-land resources are being exploited and there's erratic rainfall, people are not getting the productivity of the land. Our marine resources we have are currently being, I would say, overutilized by different, contractual obligation government have with different companies, which is also a threat to the livelihood of people. If people don't have any livelihood within their communities, they will definitely find opportunities to go and live. They need to survive. Aside that, I think it's also important. From my own experience, we also talk more on economics. We also talk about all these common issues that has to do with migration. But the one thing that I can say also contribute to people movement, it's not just the presence of opportunity, but absence of opportunity, but young people confident in the economic and political system in place matters a lot in terms of whether they stay or they move. So for me, this is quite essential that states, member states need to, Gambia government in particular, need to ensure that citizens are reassured, Gambian citizens. We have seen during Jammeh's time, a lot of young people migrating, moving out. When the new government came into office in 2016, during campaign, people were even saying, campaigning, shouting, no more back way, that they are not going to migrate now. But if those hopes, those expectations that make them to change their mind, to stay at home, that contribute to reducing the numbers, not stopping it, but reducing the number. If those hopes are dashed away, if those expectations are not met, they cannot be stopped. They will definitely find alternatives for their livelihood, because that's what they have. When affluent or richer or other people in policy making, when they need opportunity for their children, like my brother said, they go for golden visas. But these ordinary people who vote for politicians in office, if they don't have that opportunity, they will risk their energy, their life, and any resource that they have, including family resources, to make ends meet. So this is one of my recommendations or best practice we can look at.
Thank you, Mr. Lamin and Dr. Paul. With your past experience in the grassroots level, we enjoyed, in fact, your experiential knowledge. In fact, so many complex issues you brought and best practices. Thank you both. And thank you all our participants. We have very limited time, so many of you couldn't ask questions. I'm feeling sorry. And thank you all the dignitaries, Professor Khadria, Paddy, and so many other. And I think we'll stop here and goodbye, and we'll be again meeting very soon. And thank you especially Mr. Lamin and Dr. Paul. You have been so much with the information and experience. It was very nice to discuss with you.